Yeah, save this for after, everyone. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our final seminar presentation before Reading Week, which I'm sure everybody's looking forward to. Ladies, thank you. It is my pleasure to introduce Wayne Maksylewich as our speaker today. Wayne has an MSc in environmental engineering. He is a mechanical and chemical engineering and safety background in industrial hygiene. He's a registered CIH and Canadian safety professional and a certified safety professional. I'm being corrected here, although you can't hear him. And port security officer. He's experienced as an environmental health and safety engineer with BC Rail, a risk manager at Macmillan Bloedel, a director of safety and risk at HJ Heinz, senior director HSSE at Imperial Sugar. What does HSSE stand for? Health, safety, security, and environment, and he is a freelance consultant. And I'm going to turn your microphone on. Welcome, Wayne.
Thanks. My apologies. I don't usually make presentations in cargo pants, a sweat top, and sitting in a wheelchair. But this is the result of a very bad risk assessment about 14 months ago. So always be aware that if you have a low probability, high consequence event, sometimes they happen. On that note, I guess I should jump to the first slide. Okay, why is Je suis Charlie up there? Because the one thing that you folks, it's been a bit controversial, but the one thing all of you are going to find in your careers is the ability to speak openly and candidly and transparently on subjects, both within business, within government, and publicly, is a dearly won freedom. I've spent my life in a lot of countries where it's just not possible. And being an expatriate, if you spoke up, you didn't get your visa renewed. That was the easy portion. Some countries, you just disappeared. So always keep that in mind. I'm going to bump to this one. Where are you going to work? If you all think you're going to work in Vancouver, I don't think so. The problem with British Columbia is there's a dichotomy between the tree huggers and the tree whackers. I mean, it's basically a resource economy, but Vancouver believes it can go through without. You're going to need resource economies. Some of you are going to work elsewhere in BC if we ever get a few gas pipelines and others, some more development. Some of you may work elsewhere in Canada. I suspect some of you will work outside of Canada where it really gets exciting. The United States, I spent a lot of my time starting with Macmillan Bloedel, working there in Mexico. Interesting places, but totally different regulatory regimes. Useful designations. There's only two. I'm not afraid of dumping my opinion on the ground. CIH, I suggest all of you write that one. Forget the ROH. Now, I'm likely to go up in a big flame saying that. The ROH designation is a niche. It's about 250 members. I'm one of them. I keep sending in my money for some strange reason. I'm a sucker. But the CIH is globally recognized, as is the CSP. The CIH is the tough exam. The CSP, because of their fire safety aspect, you have to know some engineering, but no more difficult than doing the vent portion of the CIH. So I'd suggest you folks write those. Once you've got your CIH, you write the final exam in the CSP. But get that CIH and hang on to it. What does that define? Anybody want to take a wild stab at what that is a definition of? You're in the course, it's occupational hygiene. I'm going to call it industrial hygiene. Now, I've underlined and bolded the word hazards. How many of these hazards have you studied? Most of you have got the chemical, biological, radiation, and sound. Does anybody know what PSM is? Come on, take a stab at it. process safety management. That's for highly hazardous industrial operations. PSM is a way to assess the risks, implement suitable controls. LOTO, thank you. You're going to be out in industry. You're going to have to know these things, whether you're working as a hygienist or working as the head of the EHS program, which is where many of you will end up being. Don't get stuck being just a hygienist. You'll end up being in a niche technical role unless you move more broadly. Human factors. Anybody know what human factors is? Ooh, that's the unkindest cut of all me left, sir. Human factors is we'll get that slide later, but ergonomics is a very small part of human factors. Look it up, take a look at it, you'll need it. And then legal compliance. How many of you have studied anything about legal systems? Regulations. Due diligence. If I asked you about Regina versus Battishoe in Ontario, would anybody know what I talked about? How about Regina versus Sault Ste. Marie, 1954? Boy, that's your homework assignment. And I'm quite serious, you should know those things, especially when you get out into industry, or even government. I'm not going to give you the answers. Here's what the ABIH says about definitions about IH. Precise definition does not exist. Okay, it defines IH ethics and safety. Within IH rubrics, they even include security. So all the security work that I've done over the years is IH. Why did I get into security? I was in Asia and we had 9/11. And I happened to have my HR director in the New Marriott Hotel in Jakarta when somebody set up a car bomb down below. He was lucky. Also worked in Africa where it's a little more in your face day to day, hour to hour. Management systems, let's get to the topic of this. They tend to be one-size-fits-all models. And we've got more of these damn things than I ever thought we were going to have. I date from the days when we were writing ISO 14000. That whole series, it started with 14001 and became a moneymaker for the standards organization. Whoops, sorry. Okay, we go all the way down through those. CSA Z1000 is interesting because it's a copycat of the ANSI AIH standard. I guess we had to make one to be Canadian. That's a sorry excuse. There's even more. And then there's a bunch of company-specific models. And has anybody heard of ISO 45000? Okay, that's OSAS 18001, which was a beaten-up British standard that became a standard because people wanted something for safety because they didn't know what they were doing. And now we've got an official ISO standard coming out, which will be as bad as the rest of the ISO standards. Okay, so why am I so down on these standards? Well, we hope that the standards are going to give us those things. Okay, we've got a bunch of demands there. We hope our standards are going to eliminate incidents, whether they're environmental, safety, security, whatever they are. Well, here's the reality of it. There was the UK Environmental Agency decided to look at 1,000 firms, 500 approximately ISO 14,000, about 500 weren't. And guess what? There was no difference in performance. It caused quite a considerable dissent in the ISO 14,000 community. But they shouldn't have been surprised because of the way the standard was written and the way the ISO audits are carried out. We'll get into that in a little bit more detail. big thing here is remember that systems are just a starting point. Does anybody know Enron, Arthur Andersen? Oh boy. Enron? Enron was an energy company in Texas. And what happened was the executives decided to rape and pillage and put lots of money in their pockets. Arthur Andersen was a global accounting firm, accounting and consulting and management systems. And they'd help Arthur Andersen helped Enron evade those systems that they helped build. Eventually, a few people went to jail, and Arthur Andersen disappeared as a corporate entity. So, management systems, yes. That's what you can get with a management system. That's what I actually did. When I left Canada, I joined H.J. Heinz. My job in Asia Pac was to reduce the bloody accident rate. They were injuring about 50% of their people every year. People requiring at least medical treatment. They weren't measuring much. That's what we managed to do. On the left, you're going to see a scale, which is the medical incident rate. That's the U.S. OSHA medical incident rate. All of you should know what that definition is. And on the right is an audit score. So as the audit score goes up, down comes the accident rate. And you can apply that to anything, whether it's quality, environmental infractions, or so forth. A properly applied management system will drive that sort of result. That was for one business unit. That's the second one. You notice that there's a 45 on the left side. That's an annual average. We were up at 43% for that year, the first year we really started tracking cases. 43% of those employees required medical treatment. That was Australia and New Zealand. Same thing happened when we started doing work in the rest of Asia Pac. So over a number of years, and it takes years, guys, not days, not months, not a year, you're going to have to change a culture. So management systems, we need these things. Now that's actually something out of Regina versus Batashoe. So management in Canada, by law, by court decision, and you'll also see this reflected in the Alberta Occupational Health and Safety Standards. They'll reference Batashoe versus Regina. Regina versus Batashoe. So suitable systems, awareness, periodic reports, those are things that you're going to have to help management do. That should roll all the way up to the board of directors. If you're going to have an effective system, it must do it by management leading by example. You folks can't run these programs. You're the technical experts. Too often, what happens is you're given the role of drive the program without any real oomph from management. At that point, start dusting off your resume and looking for a job somewhere else, because management is not serious. A bit more on management systems. The reason I set this slide out is culture is what you're trying to change. And culture will vary everywhere in a company or an organization. It'll vary based on, particularly if you have an isolated unit somewhere with a very headstrong manager, you've got to be careful it doesn't go sideways in a big way. For every reason, financially, production, as well as areas that you may be responsible for. So you're trying to align and get a consistent corporate culture. You do that, however, by introducing a management system. But it doesn't allow you to do something. You've got no levers. What you're looking at is your control systems. Now I put audits up front there because that's usually the first thing you want to do is a good audit. And ISO audits are bad audits. I'll talk to you about why. Outcomes, you're trying to measure what happened. You've got what's called leading and trailing indicators. Somebody tell me what a leading indicator is. Anyone? Is Dr. Teschke still here? Leading indicator is something that you use before you have an incident. What the heck is that? Well, actually, your accident rate or your incident rate's a leading indicator because it tells you, unless you make some changes, you're going to get the same damn thing back. So you can use a variety of things. Incident investigations, that's trailing. Percentage of safe conditions or safe behaviors, that's leading. You're trying to get a measure of how things are before they go wrong. And usually you try and express things positively. I'm positively sure you guys are unsafe. Okay, a bit more, just a little bit about what you need to look for on leadership, whether you're leading or whether your CEO is leading. And I can't emphasize enough. The one thing Heinz did, well, actually even BC Railway, when I first started in British Columbia in '81, Tumbler Ridge Project, they just said go out and do what you need to do. And the same thing McMillan Lodell. Yes, we had corporate constraints, but it was amazing how much they trusted in us to deliver. Heinz was even more fun because I got to play and build anything I wanted to. I mean, if you're an expatriate, usually you're there because one, they need the job done. Two, if you don't do something, it's not going to happen. So when SARS happened, I walked into my VP's office. I'd listened to Julie Gerberding, CDC. She made some comments about SARS and the potential risks. I put a summary together, issue, recommendations, and discussion for my VP. Walked in and said, we've got a problem. This is what I think we should do. He looked through the first bit, made a couple of small changes, and said, go with it. So I got to set the whole program up about 4 or 5 months before most people in Asia even thought of it as a threat. So it was nice in that we had controls, no incidents at any of our facilities. It's difficult in many cases to do that if you're back in Canada or the United States. Most companies have internal bureaucracies. If you're an expatriate, have fun. It can be the best and the worst of possible worlds. Your structure, line management, accountability, yes, I'll get on to that a little later in some detail. And then process and actions, those are the other ends of things. You got another little wrinkle though. Your management system can't be static. And when you start, you're going to be the glowing star, but you want to give that hot potato to someone else, preferably the line management. So we started with something like that. And what's interesting is if you're in developing countries, India, China, all of Africa, and the things you're going to see look like they date from when? The Industrial Revolution in England and the early 1900s in the US. If you go back to the Triangle Shirt Fire, how many of you know of that case? 1, 2. I recommend you guys do some reading. Okay, that's another assignment, Triangle Shirt Fire. And what happened was not dissimilar from Bangladesh, only in the US. Teddy Roosevelt introduced the US FDA and a number of regulatory controls because health, safety, and food quality, etc., were so bad in the US in the 1900s. H.J. Heinz got started by making horseradish in clear bottles because his competitors adulterated theirs so badly and put them in not clear bottles. This is straight out of 3M, the past, the present. So we've moved in most of the developed world past where we were in terms of regulations, injuries, and acute phenomena. Now we have this, we've got everybody in there, and the media and customers. So your management system is going to have to evolve. This is out of probably the best managed HSSE program in the world. Anybody want to suggest who the best HSSE program belongs to? Come on, gentlemen here sitting in the front row. Anybody else, sir? Anybody else? Okay, anybody else? All right. Close. Those are all pretty good. Who? Yeah, they're damn good. Actually, my opinion, the best program in the world is Exxon, because of what they've done after a certain boat ran into a certain reef in a certain state in the United States. Anybody know Exxon Valdez? Yeah. So if you ever get a job with an Exxon or a Shell or a BHP, you're going to find you're going to learn some very interesting things. I'd strongly suggest they're a great step for anybody coming out of school. So you start with your basics, move on to fundamentals. Now those dotted lines, your basic, originally Exxon had a 10 up there for a TIR, total recordable injury rate, or TRIR. That's the OSHA medical incident rate, which I suggest you become familiar with. Lost time is for idiots. I'm blunt. Fundamentals, then you move down to something called specialized with human factors, cultural alignment, work-life balance, etc. That's where Exxon is. All right, so this is the 3M version of that. Reactive dependent. You're trying to move people to interdependent, where everybody looks after everybody. Literally at Exxon, when they start work, people do a last-minute risk assessment amongst themselves. And then somebody comes along to do a behavior assessment, some supervisor. The EHS department doesn't do any of that. What do? Well, they look at developments in EHS to see where they should be going. They didn't just get there overnight. One of the interesting things in the United States is there are lunatics about drug use. And they're forever doing drug tests. Well, what's interesting is there's one factor that's about 40 times more likely to be a risk factor, and that's fatigue. And yet they don't assess fatigue routinely in the United States. And it's more likely to be the source of your injury or your incident, your error. You can test for fatigue, just not conveniently. It's easier just to have somebody pee in the bottle or exhale. Incidentally, DuPont used to have the world's best safety program. They've run into a few walls the last couple of years with some major disasters and a number of people killed. Was what? They're not an industrial operation, and they're not exactly my idea of a well-managed group. Now, that's an Exxon slide. So what's going on here? So why was Exxon finding this? Well, what they did is they look at this is something that their EHS department does. Somebody tell me what time it is. I'm getting close to the end. I'm talking too much. Human error. So they started to look at human factors. That's a list of those things that are part of human factors. The psychological as well as the physical aspects of human error, which dates from World War I and aircraft design. Another thing for you guys to chase. Auditing, a convoluted exercise of interrogation. Yep, if you're being audited, you sit and sweat. Trust me, been there, done that. In front of a board of directors, I was the guy being audited, and the report was on my audit program. Okay, the problem with ISO audits is they don't verify. Audits verify you have an adequate system competently applied. Inspections aren't audits. Some references. Accounting Standards, Canadian Institute of Chartered Accountants has got a very nice EHS audit. Why are they interested? Because it's a source of liability. And then Arthur D. Little, they went bankrupt about probably 10 years ago, but they wrote the EHS auditing text. If you can find any of their material, get it, because it'll be useful. It teaches you how to audit. And verification of the system is what you need. Because this is what ISO does. They're sitting in the front office with a CEO who's telling them it's all hunky-dory. But meanwhile, in the back office, hell breaking loose. So ISO looks at paper. The ISO 9000 standard wasn't a quality standard. It was a consistency standard. As long as you were consistently bad, you were fine. Just they didn't want you to stagger back and forth between good and bad. That's a brief summary of audits, what you should be looking for. Those are questions that you should be asking every level of management. You know, what is your system? What do you understand? Those questions help determine errors. And we'll get to that under risk assessment. That's supposed to be a risk assessment. Regulators have caught the British disease. The Brits like risk assessments. I call them wet thumb guesstimates because that's what they are. For the most part, it's done incompetently, randomly, and no relationship to reality because they miss this. Risk assessments, if you're going to do that guesstimate properly, needs to be tied in very tightly to this sort of framework. If you don't, operation A, B, C, and D are all going to be doing everything differently. And it's not just safety risk assessment you have to do these days. If anybody know what arc flash is? Couple? That's where you get cooked when you open an electrical panel if you're not careful. So if you open a panel at, say, over 220 volts, not likely to cook you, but you get to 440, and you can have an arc flash back that will kill you quickly, if you're lucky. If you're not, you're burned extremely badly. So you do risk assessments underneath the new US 70E standard. So they're all over the place. But that's a proper framework. You're also going to get this, the eliminate, reduce, or tolerate. It's not always just a, can I do this? There's an economic component that you're going to have to deal with always in making that judgment. You're also going to find risk assessments will vary. Not just that funny little matrix. But that's comes out of Exxon. Again, they do a mental risk assessment for frequently done jobs that have got a low risk in them. They require their people to do those. They train their people. Every operational person in Exxon sits through a 1-week course on safety leadership or EHS leadership. And there's a quiz at the end, and if they don't pass it, they don't keep their position. Now, these are supposed to be engineers. I are one, I think. This is a risk assessment properly applied to a chemical exposure. There's a process for doing this, and that is what you should follow. Anybody here do Bayesian? Bayesian analysis? That's another one you guys should study up on. 3M has been pretty big on it. I'm a very strong advocate. Should be part of this. It isn't, but will be. That's a risk assessment. Again, with the matrix, that's something that Exxon put together for their people. Some of these risks will fall over more than one risk category. But they also include not just this, but what do you do with traveling executives or traveling employees and their exposure to infectious diseases, or their exposure to car accidents, or their exposure to bad food or bad water. All those things should be part of what you do. And since you guys are the technological experts, this may fall in your basket. Here's something, James Reason. Anybody know James Reason and the Swiss cheese model of errors? Boy, there's another one for you to read on. What Reason proposes that accidents are the result of what he calls Swiss cheese. You have systems in place to prevent these errors. I should be calling them errors, not accidents, but errors. And sometimes everything lines up the wrong way, like me in my wheelchair. I did a risk assessment casually. I did some things to mitigate the damage or the probability. I just didn't mitigate the buried root, the only one that my head met. So on this, it's somewhat more difficult. Audits will help you determine, a good audit will help you catch errors in your management system. But some of these damn things are latent. They're hidden, they're hard to come by, and they may not pop up for years. Metrics, that's what you're measuring things with. Why not lost work days? Because the definition varies. In the UK and Singapore, it's not a lost work day until you've been off work for 7 days. Typically, most people use 3 days. OSHA says if you can't do any or all of your next shift, it's a lost time. And then the other thing that happens is they tend to throw The Walking Dead and out of the lost times, except in the US. Who are The Walking Dead? Those are the return to works that can't really work. They have them doing a make job. But it keeps their lost time numbers down. All those fiddles make lost, plus the fact that you don't get many lost times. So it doesn't tell you what's really happening in your system because you're aliasing the system. Anybody know what aliasing is? It's where you're sampling at an incorrect interval so it doesn't allow you to characterize your population. So if you're going to do a trailing indicator, I would suggest the US OSHA medical incident rate. It's very robust, extremely well defined. I'm surprised that Canadian organizations like WorkSafe haven't adopted something like that. It's highly remiss that they have not. Your metrics are also going to change. When you start, as your program moves from organizational to individual, which is where you want to go, you start finding that your statistics and audits are, as you're finding and correcting all the deficiencies, are not going to be as useful anymore. But you're going to find things like hazard IDs and worksite inspections reported by individuals. Defects are going to be where you want to go, and those are going to be more important. That's an example of some reactive and some proactive metrics. I'm not going to go over them. I'll leave them to you. LTIR is lost time incident rate. Here's some reading. I've suggested some are already. Cotter and Magretta. Cotter because he defines how to make change in an organization. I happened to read him after I got successful with Heinz. I wish I'd had him before. But the model is much the same. You build your consensus in a group, you celebrate small successes and so forth. It's an easy read. I'm finished. All right, we got time for one question.
We got time for lots of questions, you guys. So.
Oh, damn.
Hi, Wayne. I just wanted you to tell a little bit about some of the issues you dealt with in Heinz and where in the world you were. I think that people would be interested to know a little bit
Where have
more
I
about that.
been? Oh, Lordy. The reason for leaving Macmillan Bloedel was the Canadian Forest. It was a great company, and I was sorry to see what happened to it. Mismanagement within the company, and by the government letting it be sold. But I jumped off to Asia Pac because some Heinz made me a bit of a serendipitous job offer to build something starting in New Zealand. So I spent 2.5 years there dealing with Australia, New Zealand. The big issues were just nobody was reporting accidents. We didn't know what was happening, really. So how do you get people to record something? And then there was no coupling to their accident rate because in New Zealand, all accidents are funded by one fund. Doesn't matter whether it's a sports accident or a work accident. And so if your costs are not a consideration, why do you worry? Well, we ended up moving to a self-managed model that saved us $2 million US in the first year. So that made a believer out of some people because we were managing the situation, not it managing us. And then there were things like old ammonia refrigeration systems that were ready to blow up. Well, okay, you overpressurize them and they go. They have on a discharge valve, they have a relief valve on their tanks for ammonia and other compressed refrigerants. And usually what they do is they run a straight pipe up and put an S-bend in it, and then drill a hole in the bottom of the S-bend so rainwater drains out. The trouble is pipes rust if they're mild steel. So if you find the whole pipe rusted shut, it doesn't matter if the relief valve is going to open, the damn thing is going to blow. So there were all those. There were pipes that when you opened up the insulation, there was half the wall thickness left. And you look at your partner and he looks at you and you figure, how fast can we run? There were requests to control cobras in the grass in Indonesia. There was China. There were due diligence work in China for acquisitions. There's people, you start to see how the corruption work when people try to sell you a business. And they've skimmed off, well, one business in Beijing had 95% of the market for 18 million people. Well, it turned out that this company, which had venerable roots back several hundred years, had been raped by the management. What they had done is set up co-packers, in other words, companies that manufactured the same product, moved it into the Heinz, this company's supply chain, and then sold. Well, that doesn't sound so good because your co-packers have a big handle on you. And then what they were doing was selling or moving equipment over to these co-packers as junk. So it was surplus to the state-owned enterprise, and they were moving it laterally. And then some of the directors in these independent firms were directors of the state-owned company. Very interesting. And nobody checking. The stuff sort of, moves around and it's junk, so we sold it or got a good price, and it's independent guy. And I mean, it's just amazing. And then again, you get the maglev train in Shanghai, walking on the Bund at night, taking photographs, being shot at in Nigeria. I was head of security and safety and environment for the port, for the container port. My first week on the job, we had the employees riot, so we had to evacuate the expats. Does that give you a summary? I was looking for a Glock 26. You know why? Anybody know what a Glock 26 is? Okay, Glock makes some very nice little pistols, lightweight, very nice safeties, very safe for the handler. The Glock 26 is a cut-down model, so it's about the size of a cell phone. Fits very nicely in the waistband. So why do I want one of these? Well, because if you get caught in a go-slow in Nigeria, somebody smashes in a window and sticks a pistol in your face and asks for things. And that's not a desirable situation. and an AK-47, which is available quite readily on the black market, they're a little awkward inside a vehicle. So a Glock, you just shoot through the door if you really have to. The round takes the guy in the midsection, he folds and you leave. It's that brutal.
Wally is Nigerian. Did you want to comment, Wally?
Lagos. What tribe are you from? Yoruba. That's an inside joke. No, it's Nigeria is very tribal. Unlike East Africa, West Africa is kind of an interesting place. Very different. Any other questions? Sorry, I've been long-winded.
No, thanks, Wayne. Thank you so much for imparting your knowledge and vast experience, and very interesting ones too.
Don't say that. I'm going to look for a shovel.
I'm interested in hearing your thought on the Toyota production system, the Kaizen way of management system, which had been said to be unconventional, but it seemed to have worked. And you've shown us good examples of North American way of approaching safety management.
Thanks. You brought up something which I think is which is invaluable. Is the link of the way Toyota does the production. What they try to do is where you should be taking HSSE programs or EHS, whatever you want to call it. You're trying to give the tools. I've heard people call it empowerment. Throw that out. That's the wrong word. You're trying to give tools to people so they can do their job in an intelligent fashion. And the support services they need have to be immediately there, whether they're physical resources or people resources. And that aspect is what Toyota did very successfully. They lost their vision, and they've had some problems with quality recently. But if they get back to that model, then that's going to stand them in good stead. But that should be an example for every management system model. It's difficult because you really need to spend time with your employees, upskilling, uplifting, and working with them. Now, I had the honor of going through a GM factory in Pune, in India, and a Ford factory. And what was interesting is that the GM folks, there wasn't an expatriate on that site, but it was one of the most well-run, tidy sites I've ever seen. And one of the company I was doing some work for, the local workforce, the guys at the plant wanted to show me what they were doing. So they had a fall arrest and a confined space entry work area set up so they could train people. On their own initiative, they'd set those things up. So theirs was more of a Kaizen environment. The Ford factory was, I didn't know how they managed to keep it going. Simply the number of errors I saw. So two contrasts, so thank you.
We've got an online question. I think you're going to enjoy this one. Is it possible to have a world-class workplace safety management system in a country that is not considered a first world country?
Easy. I built them. Well, what's really funny, nobody asked the question, what am I most proud of in my career? Thank you. The teams that I built when I was at Heinz, most of them are still there. And guess what? They function well. And the accident rate, Heinz has got one of the best EHS programs in the world. When I got started, I got asked to build the safety program. Well, I'm always looking at everything, so I stick my finger where I'm not wanted. So we built security, safety, environment, loss control, business continuity, everything I could think of was in that pie. And the guys and girls got to do it. So they were embedded in each country. They reported indirectly to me. I don't have people report to me. Wrong model. I put them again where they're most useful. At the site, at the country level, whatever's needed. And those people, most of them are still there. One of the guys I trained as my successor, Heinz fired all of us in the regional office in 2006. They ran into a takeover bid, so cost cutting. We went to Singapore. office. But the guy I trained as my successor about 3-4 years after they did the whacking, they realized, oops, so re-stepped into my job. Keeps doing a good job. He's actually based here in Vancouver now. So yeah, you can build a world-class system anywhere. It's just getting your people's confidence. Openness, transparency. And you folks should get out there. The first thing is, you don't know everything. You're going to need to work as part of a team. If I'm leading the team, the buck stops on my desk. But make sure I don't take... Has anybody seen the movie Ender's Game? Okay, me too. Well, what he says at one point when he gets his own team is that I can't be everywhere and I can't think about everything. And that was my management style. Guys, the bucks will stop here. But make sure I don't take the team off the cliff. Always remember, if you have a question or an objection, raise it. And we'll discuss it. We'll deal with it. Maybe you're right and I'm wrong. That's what you have to do to build your teams in third world countries, and also Canada and the US and any place else.
Oh, my question will just be a follow-up to that question online. Is like, in a place like Nigeria, where corruption is endemic, it's like entrenched in the general population, and we don't have the regulations. So do you find it a lot more difficult to build this safety system?
No. There are some unique challenges in Nigeria. The number of tribes causes a lot of dissent because there's always conflict. Plus there is corruption. I was coming over a bridge one day with my driver going for dinner at a restaurant, and we got stopped in the usual police stop. And the driver rolled the window down about 3-4 inches, talked to the policeman, and I'm sitting there looking at him. And he says, "Oh, good evening, sir. Any dash for the officer?" Dash is a bribe. I said, "No, not tonight." And he said, "Oh, okay, that's fine. Be on your way." I mean, it's that common. A dash for US dollar would be a huge thing. What was the exchange rate? 160 to 1. Now, what would I do in Nigeria? Well, first, if I hire one tribe, they're going to take everything I've got and more. So I'll hire people from at least 4 tribes, and they'll self-police. So what I had was a team with 15 guys, ex-Secret Service, ex-Army. They were my team, so I built the team the same damn way I did in any other place. Guys, I'm going to give you some trust. You know, Nigeria's got a bad rep. If you trust me, I'm going to trust you guys too. And we solved a case that involved the loss of 40 52-foot containers in 2 years. How do you lose 40 containers, 40 shipping containers, inside a locked, guarded container yard? That was my first job. The other one was to solve the fatality rate. They kept killing people. So how did I find out how they stole the damn things? Well, first I walked around the whole yard to see what our physical security was like. Now, a reach stacker is a device that lifts these full containers up, sometimes 7 stories to stack them. So you see them 7 high in the yard. So a reach stacker could reach over the fence and drop a container on a truck. But it was just too busy. Too much visibility. So we had a briefing of the team. You know, we're all going to look out for things that may be suspicious. So one of the guys noted there was a container which had moved 2 or 3 times during a day. And it had an odd number on it. That's why he noted the number. And then he saw the container going out about midnight on a truck. Now there's a series of documents that have to get presented, stamped, and copies left various places as you leave the port. So we knew when the truck had gone out. So the next morning at 6 o'clock, I got to the site. We went over and retrieved the document. We couldn't with the others because we didn't know when. The only reason we knew the containers were missing, we knew they had come in. We'd stacked them in the yard, and the customer had come asking, and we couldn't produce them. Ooh. So the customer got the insurance money. And we suspected he'd been the one who'd arranged for the loss of the container. So we tracked this back, and we started to dig a little bit more in our departments and found out that, oh, there was only one password and everybody knew it. And we tracked the trailer and the driver. We found the empty container, and the place where it was dropped off, we had some nasty armed people with AK-47s. My guys had pistols, so they left. We never did find the shipment, but we put a stop to things because with that one password, people were cutting fake exit documents. We arrested 3 people internally, and the police interrogated them. I did not attend the interrogation. This is Nigeria. Well, they didn't really resist when we arrested them. They knew why. So that stopped. I was persona non grata with Nigerian customs and the port. They were getting a rake off from every one of these containers. It was $10,000 paid to one of our employees to cut those fake orders. We also had an issue with people selling diesel fuel internally to the truck drivers. You get a truck driver comes in, your fuel bowser to fuel your reach stackers goes over and offers to fill his tank for $1. The bribe back and forth was costing us $1 million a year in fuel. Same way, you put a stop to it by changing your management system and your controls.
You and I have had a lot of private conversations about the importance of upper management in the success of your management systems, and I'm wondering if you could just comment on that.
Yeah, I've been fairly lucky in that regard. BC Rail, the chief engineer who I reported to was a wonderful boss and some great people I worked with. Very supportive when I went out and did things. And in 1981, BC didn't have much for environmental regulations, but it was starting to. So I managed to get ahead of the regulatory game so I could get rid of wastes and contaminated soils and a whole number of things that would have made life difficult if I'd waited. Then at Mac Blows, same thing, right up to I got to make the board presentations. My boss, the department director, didn't like speaking. So I sweated through a couple of presentations and got to where I very much enjoyed them. So support from the board down was important. And then at Heinz, the same thing. I had a VP who was very interested. Imperial Sugar, then they blew up the factory, killed 14 people. They gave me $26 million to help fix things. So management support was fundamental in all these cases.
From your experience, do you think working abroad for recent graduates is feasible, or is it more something 10 years experience and then you can go abroad?
Whatever you can find, you eat what you kill. Sorry, bad cliche. Here's my perspective. I had a 3-year-old daughter when we left Canada, and a wife who was in a law career. She was a lawyer, 2 law degrees from McGill, BCom from UBC, and an MBA. She's the educated one. So, of course, she lost that income in that part of her life. So that's important. What's your spouse's career? And your child. Alex grew up in Singapore and considers herself a Singaporean. She's tall, 5'9", blonde, speaks Mandarin with a Chinese accent. I mean, it's funny because everybody figures, who's this blonde is talking and she sounds like that. She's fluent. You know, little things like that are important. But she's what's called a third culture kid. She's not Canadian. She has 0 ties to Canada, doesn't want to come back. I've got permanent residency in a few countries, including the U.S. The U.S. one expires in 10 years. After 5, you can take up citizenship, which she'll do. Or she can jump to New Zealand or Australia. And I let my Singapore PR lapse because I didn't think I was going back. But yeah, I mean, I would try. The best time is early on in your career or towards the end of it when your kids are growing up. Australia would be a great place. They're always looking for people. Australian EHS work is some of the best in the world. Certainly the IH stuff is good down there.
Hi, Wayne. Thank you for your stories. I have a question. As new grads, we're going to go out in the field and we might find ourselves in some risky situations where we might not have assessed the risk or hazard as you've suggested. Are you able to share your story with us? Or
Which story? Oh, my wheelchair.
And any suggestions? Or?
Sure. The suggestions, one thing that's popped up recently is the incidence of low consequence events in the U.S., particularly on safety. The number of these events has continued to decline. However, for serious events like deaths or permanent disability, those have plateaued, and there's been a considerable discussion why. I'd suggest there's a white paper by BSI, Behavior Sciences, Inc., that does some discussion, but I don't think comes to a good solution. I think we have to go back to Reason's model again and realize that latent defects in your control system are sometimes the source of your event. In my case, I ride a mountain bike. I've done it for years. Savannah, Georgia is kind of flat. Well, very flat. And I was out for my usual ride through the marsh. There are a couple of walkways that are about 16 inches wide going over the marsh. And sometimes the leading edge of these things are overgrown with tree roots. So when I get to them, typically I kick out of my pedals. Typical cross-country mountain bike. Full suspension, rocky, disc brakes, just a really nicely tricked out bike. Sorry, not many of you are bikers. So anyway, I'm off for my usual ride. I get to this walkway, kick out of my pedals, that's my risk assessment. If I have to bail, I don't want to get muddy. Now, I was going to switch those pedals out for a set of downhill pedals which don't lock you in. Hadn't done it yet. There's a reason why I was going to. Anyway, I start pedaling and my right shoe slips, clips in. Here's the big mistake. I looked down and said, oh shit. That was my epiphany. Now, the first thing is you will drive a car or a bicycle or a skateboard where you're looking. So you always want to look in the distance so you know where you're going, not down here. When I looked down there, I drove off the walkway. I was barely moving, but my front wheel dropped a ways and pitched me forward. And I tried to bail to the right, and for some reason, my right shoe did not come out. So I went forward, and my head hit I was rotating as I hit. I went off the right-hand side of the bike, and the left side of my helmet hit the root, buried in the mud. And I woke up about, I don't know how long I woke up, and my first thought was, am I going to die? So I figured I'd broken something. Second thought was, how do I say goodbye to my wife and daughter? Then I realized, because I was still breathing, that the damage must have been further down. So all I could think of was, please let me die. Why? Because I know what it's like with a spinal cord injury patient. Technically, not personally. And I know what it's like being stuck in a wheelchair. And I'm technically a quadriplegic. I broke it at the C3-4. I'm luckier than most quads that I can move, and there's a good chance I'll walk again. My fingers, however, don't like doing things. And you get what's called spastic reaction. Your muscles and nerves are not always connected through to the brain anymore. So if you get a stimulation, it causes an electrical firing of your neurons up and down the muscles, and it positively reinforces. And then you manage to break that spasm somehow. It can be extremely painful to the point of kidney stone level pain. All you want to do is scream. Medication helps, but doesn't completely solve it. So, what's my goal? First, get out of this damn chair, which I'm working hard on. Second thing is get back in the workforce, which I'm working hard on. The other one is if you're living in the U.S., insurance has got big holes in it. And at $10,000 a day for an inexpensive hospital, not including doctors, x-rays, and anything else, the costs mount up. One other guy was in there who'd been center punched on his motorcycle. This guy ran into the side of him and then ran, didn't run. He worked for Gulfstream, and the good insurance package, it cost him $272,000 out of pocket additional. So I wasn't alone. The reason why I'm up here is my ex-wife, where she was born in Vancouver. She's got family up here, including some doctors who suggested getting me up to GF Strong. When I got discharged, I had 3 months time in a nursing home in the U.S., and then my insurance would have run out. Well, my wife certainly couldn't look after me, and there was no income other than me. So I'm up here. So the accident didn't just cost me. Accidents don't just hurt you. They hurt your family more. So my wife and I finished a divorce we were sort of banging around with, mostly for asset protection. There's not enough assets left. She may have to go out to work. My daughter, fortunately, is on a full scholarship for 4 years. And I'm stuck at Banfield Pavilion fighting for seniors and folks in wheelchairs. I'm a pain in the ass.
And having coffee with me every couple of weeks.
Yeah, that's my hot date.
Wayne, we're a little bit over time here, so I'm going to
Sorry.
wrap things up. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us and for sharing your experiences with us. Thanks,
Yeah.
Wayne.
Thank you all very much. I sometimes get off on war stories. If you